Good morning. So when I was in high school, I think I've mentioned before, I worked on my grandfather's ranch during the summers. One of the perks of working for your grandparents is that grandma makes you a nice big meal every day for lunch. And so you get to go in and eat way too much food and sit and watch Bonanza or Gunsmoke or whatever's on that day for a while. And then you get to go lay on the couch because it's grandpa and take a little nap, and so that's nice. And so I remember one of the days, I think I was going to be a junior in high school. One of the days we were sitting there and we were laying on the couch. It was about 1 o'clock, so it was about time for us to get up and get back to work. My cousin, who also worked on the ranch, he had kind of gotten himself up already, and if you looked out the window of my grandparents' living room to the east, you could see one of the neighbors' places of, he had his corral there, and he had a little house that he would spend some time in a little bit there, and he had a tree row and some fields and whatnot, and in that tree row, my cousin saw, it was billowing out smoke, and so my cousin gets excited and he yells, "Fire!" and then he runs out the door, and he's putting his boots on, and he's getting ready to go, and my grandpa and I are still trying to get ourselves coherent, and so we are peeling ourselves off the couch, trying to figure out what's going on, and look out the window, there's smoke coming out, and so we get to work. My grandfather was the chief for the rural fire department of McGrew, which, if you haven't heard of Baird, where I'm from, you surely have not heard of McGrew, so we hopped in the fire truck, and we spent the next about 6 hours fighting prairie fire, basically. And people from all around, for miles and miles, came to help us. People were bringing their tractors out and disking right in front of the fire in order to stop it from moving on. About 6 or 8 fire agencies from around the area came out to help. Dozens and dozens of people. I don't even think we still know who all exactly came out to help as much as they could put out that fire, but over the 6 hours, that fire burned up about 5,000 acres of my grandfather's, primarily just my grandfather's land. And so this was what that day consisted of for the rest of that day. And it was humbling for us to look at that and to see who all came out to help. So many people came out to help us. We don't even realize. But it's interesting, isn't it, how people, they rally together for a cause. They rally together when there's an objective out there that needs to be completed, and they get together in order to complete that work. But as Christians, I think sometimes we miss really impactful opportunities in our lives. I think sometimes in the busyness of everything that we do, so many times we miss the opportunities to just impact the people around us, the people that we come in contact with every day. I wonder, outside of our families, outside of our close network of friends, if none of us existed tomorrow, if we all died today, would Cheyenne miss us? If North Christian Church ceased to exist today, would Cheyenne miss it? I wonder that sometimes. This morning, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 5. If you have your Bibles, you can turn to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7 is probably one of Jesus' most popular, well-known messages that he ever gave. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. You may have heard of it. Basically, this message, these few chapters, is one long sermon of Jesus just talking about life. And in this message, the content really just flies in the face of culture. It flies in the face of what society says is okay and what it accepts as right. And so this morning we're going to look at just one little chunk of Scripture starting in verse 13, pretty familiar passage of what Jesus says here. Starting in verse 13, Jesus says this, if you'll read with me. "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt should lose its taste, how can it be made salty? It's no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled on by men. You are the light of the world. A city situated on a hill cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and puts it under a basket, but rather on a lampstand, and it gives light for all who are in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before men so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. This is coming after the first part of this Sermon on the Mount is the Beatitudes, pretty familiar passage as well. Jesus is basically laying out the description of the Christian character. These are attributes that Christians should have. And then following right into that is this little section on salt and light. This was pretty familiar for people back in the first century. They dealt with salt and obviously needed to have light regularly, and so this illustration really landed home for them. What Jesus makes clear here, the overall arching theme, is that Christians, followers of Jesus, are called to influence and impact the world around them. Christians are called to impact their communities. So Jesus starts off by saying that his followers are the salt of the earth. Now, there's three major uses for salt back in the first century. We're going to look at these because I think there's some things that we can draw as conclusions to what salt's use was in the first century that still apply to us today, and same thing for light as well. And so we're going to look at these three major areas that salt was used for in the first century that we're going to focus on. It preserved food. Salt purified, and it created thirst. And so if we look at these, starting with salt preserved, in the first century there was obviously no electricity, there was no refrigeration as well, and so in order to make food last longer, they would rub salt on it. And the same thing applies to us as well. Christians are responsible really for preserving morality and purity and justice and the social conscience of the world around us. Jesus is pointing them to be involved in keeping God as a part of the community around them and around us. And so for us, what that looks like, just a couple suggestions, is to, the first one is to not be quiet, to not stay silent. So many times we want to just kind of hide in our little Christian corners and not really speak up against what is going on in the world and the sin that is going on in the world. But Christians need to speak out against the evil that is prevalent in this world. We're called to speak God's truth into this world and not just sit idly by and do or say nothing. And we also can do this by just setting a good example. Things like not cheating, not lying, not taking advantage of other people. Instead, considering other people more important than ourselves, we can continue to preserve the world and God's truth around us. Secondly, salt purifies. Salt was used as kind of a healing agent back in the first century, and so if you got a cut or a wound, they would rub salt in it, and it would kind of get rid of the infection and whatnot. God is calling his church to be a place of healing. God's calling his church to be a place where sick people and hurt people and injured people can come and they can receive healing and support and encouragement. And yet so many times we build our Christian communities, and it really is a place that feels like you can't come here if you're hurt. You can't come here if you're broken. You can't come here if you're suffering in some way. God's calling his church. Jesus is pointing his church to be a church that is involved in hurting people's lives. It's okay to walk in these doors if you're hurt. It's okay to walk in these doors if you're broken. God's calling his church to purify and help heal the world around them. And third, salt creates thirst. Salt has a way of alarming your system that you need to drink some water in order to dilute the salt that you've taken in out a little bit. And the same thing is true for us as well. We should be living a life that's creating thirst, pointing people to God. We should be living a life that when people look at us, they go, I want some of that. I'm thirsty for what they have. By setting an example for other people, they can see that, and they should want some of that, and they should respond to that. And then Jesus moves on to this light illustration. And again, no electricity in the first century, so it's not a stretch to realize that there were no light bulbs. There was no flip of a switch, and you had light everywhere. So they used candles and lamps and whatnot in order to light their houses. And the illustration here is no one would put a blanket over the lamp. That would defeat the purpose of the lamp. And so A couple things that we can draw from Jesus' use of light here in this. The first one is this: light shines through the darkness. Light shines through the darkness. If you've ever made your way out of the city at nighttime, and then you light a match or somebody has a light, that light penetrates through the darkness. When I was younger, we would go vacation up in South Dakota sometimes, and we would go into the wind caves that are up there, and you'd walk down into these wind caves, and then the guide would go, okay, we're going to turn the light off now. And they'd turn the light off, and it was the darkest, blackest darkness you've ever seen in your life. You put your hand in front of your face, and you couldn't see it. It was so dark. And then he would light just a little match, just a little light. And that light, that little tiny light in complete darkness would penetrate through that darkness. And the same thing is true for us as well. As Christians, we really should be acting in such a way that what we do is seen in the midst of a world that really is living contrary to God and contrary to God's Word. And so Christians need to be living that out. Philippians chapter 2 talks about how Christians should shine like stars. And when that's done in the midst of darkness, people can spot us from all around. People can see the light through the midst of everything else going on. People see the good deeds done that reveal Christ. The second thing light does is it warns about what's around. Light warns about what is around us. The purpose of a lighthouse at the ocean is to warn ships of the shore coming up, of rocks and danger that could be approaching. And ships would have no idea that that was coming if the lighthouse wasn't there. In the same sense, Christians should be out being the light in the darkness, revealing sin that is around, revealing the struggle that is around that really likes to stay hidden in the darkness. But Christians should be out shining that light and drawing people towards Christ. And so we can reveal and warn about what is around. And then the third thing light does, it reveals the source. It reveals the source. The candle or the lamp, it has to get its power, its supply from somewhere. So a candle has a wick that it burns. Same thing with a light bulb. It has an element in there that glows. And so what Jesus is pointing to is really everything that we do when we're being salt and light, we should be revealing the source. This isn't about me doing it for my own purpose. It's not about me doing it so I so I can get recognition out of it. It's about pointing people to God. God is the source of my motivation. It's the source of my power. And so we point people back to God and reveal the source when we shine our light. Now, Jesus had another side to this illustration as well. There was the positive. You need to be salt, you need to be light. But Jesus also talks about how salt can lose its taste. He also talks about how people tend to hide their light. And so the other side to this is true as well. Jesus realized not everybody all the time is going to be salt and light for Jesus. And so he talks about that just a little bit. He talks about how no one would ever want to necessarily lose the saltiness, but it happens sometimes, and we don't always want to hide our light, but it happens sometimes. And so diving into this with salt, sodium chloride, salt, cannot actually lose its saltiness, and you probably know that. But Jesus wasn't teaching a chemistry lesson here. He was teaching a lesson in philosophy. The illustration is still true. Salt can lose its effectiveness. Salt can become really less effective in what it does. Where Jesus was teaching, there was a familiar body of water called the Dead Sea, and this was a giant salt lake, essentially. And what would happen was waves would wash up onto the shore, and then as they would go down, it would leave salt on the shore, on the ground. And so people would actually go out there and scrape the ground, gathering up the salt that was there, and then they would go and sell it. But what would also happen is that when you scrape that stuff off the ground, you'd also get dirt, you'd also get other junk that was on the ground there as well. That salt, yes, it had salt in it. It was also mixed up with a bunch of other stuff. And what Jesus is pointing to is that sometimes Christians get mixed up with the world. Sometimes we lose our saltiness. Other influences enter into our lives. Sin enters into our lives. Our focus goes off of Christ and on to other things, and we lose our saltiness. And Jesus warns about this happening. It affects our ability to be who Christ calls us to be. Same thing is true with light in the darkness. The struggle for us sometimes is that we shy away from really letting our light shine, letting people see us as followers of Jesus. And so we tend to kind of hide it a little bit. We keep it close to us. We let it out a little bit when it seems appropriate, when we know that there won't be any danger for us. But we tend to kind of keep it close, and we tend to kind of hide it because we're unsure of what people are going to say. We're unsure of how people are going to react if we were to just let that sucker shine out there in the darkness. And so Jesus is warning us, don't hide your light. Don't hide it. Darkness cannot defeat you. Darkness cannot overcome the light that you have. And so the question for all of us really is, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for us as people, as individuals? Last week, I encouraged and challenged you to pray that prayer in Ephesians chapter 2. God, show me the good works that you have for me to do this week and give me the strength and the courage to do it. Did you pray that prayer this week? Did you ask God to show you the ways that you can influence people around you? Are you praying that God reveal people that He wants you to influence? Are you praying for strength and courage to go out and be and do what God has called you to be and to do? Because the reality for us is that Jesus here is talking to us. He's talking to me. He's talking to you. He's saying, go be salt. Go be light. So many times we approach the things the Bible says really as suggestions, really as nice options when they're convenient for us or when they fit our schedule or what we're going through. But Jesus doesn't do that. This is a command. This is Jesus telling us to go out and be. He wasn't trying to just create a club of people who occasionally come out and do these things for the fun of it. He wasn't giving us options to pick and choose from and then leave the ones that we don't want. Being a disciple of Jesus, having Him the Lord of your life, means committing all your areas of life to Him and allowing Him to really guide you and tell you what to do. And so this is a command. Go and be light. Go and be salt. He was starting a movement of people who were surrendered and dedicated to making Jesus famous. The first church in Acts that we read about and we studied through the last couple months, that church did not grow. It did not expand that way because people were picking and choosing what they wanted to follow from God's Word. That church expanded because they were all in to following Jesus no matter what He said, no matter what He did. Jesus is calling you to be salt and light to a world that is very different from you. So if that doesn't spur you to something, let me paint a different picture for you. A recent publication put out by Franklin Graham stated the following about Wyoming. 20% of Wyoming residents identify as atheist or agnostic per capita. And this ties us for the most in the country with Montana. Out of all the states in the United States, Wyoming and Montana are tied for the highest number of people claiming agnostic or atheist. Nearly 1/3 of the residents in Wyoming have not been to church in the past 6 months. The people in this city, in this town, who do not know Jesus, those statistics, that should get you spurred up to do something. Our city and our state and our country are full of people who don't know Jesus. We are surrounded by people every day that need to hear Jesus, need to experience Him, need to have somebody in their life show them who Jesus is. Go and be salt and light to them. Every day, people like you and I rub shoulders with people who don't know Jesus, and it may be that you might be the only person in that person's life that will ever be that for them. Jesus is calling us all to be salt and light, to go influence our community. People need to hear this from you. Here's what I'm not saying, though. I'm not saying go around your neighborhood, walk the streets, go knock on doors, and go thump people over the head with your Bible. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying go stand on a corner of Del Range and Converse with Bullhorn and preach hellfire and brimstone. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying going and bullying or shaming your coworker into studying you. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is out of true, real love for that person whose destiny is sealed unless somebody shows them about Jesus and tells them about Jesus, out of love for that person, that should compel and propel us to go out and be involved in their life out of love. Not out of bulliness, not out of aggression, but out of love. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, well-known passage. We're going to read a portion of it. Says this: "If I speak in human or angelic languages, but I do not have love, I am a sounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and understand all the mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all the faith so that I can move mountains, but I do not have love, I'm nothing. And if I donate all my goods to feed the poor, and if I give my body over to boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing." All the good things that we do, all the right things that we say, the gifts that we may have are really meaningless. They're not worth anything if we don't do and say those things out of love. I have nothing. I am nothing. Our lives must be living out God's love. And so what does this mean for you and I? Let's take it maybe a step further. What does this mean for us? What if 200 of us who come and sit in a chair in North Christian Church on a Sunday morning, what if 200 of us, each individually, just said, I'm going to go be salt and light to one person? Just one person. I'm not talking about you going out and saving the entire city. I'm talking about you going out and being involved in one person's life. What would that do? How much effect would that have if one person was out there that God led you to and you were just intentional about being salt and light to that person? What would that do? That fire that tore through 5,000 acres of my grandfather's pasture land, a couple days after that was all said and done, the fire inspector sent a report to us. The cause for that fire was one small thing. A bird decided to make a nest in an electrical transformer, got itself in the wrong place, started on fire, fell to the ground. We were in the midst of a drought. That one bird in one wrong place started on fire and caused 5,000 acres of damage for us and others to deal with. It spread like wildfire throughout the area. This could happen if we all just focused on one person. If we all just had one person that we could be salt and light to, the impact would spread over this city like wildfire. It starts with just one person, but then that one person who receives it goes out and affects another person, and we go out and affect another person. And it starts growing exponentially to where we have dozens and dozens and then hundreds and hundreds of people going out and being salt and light in our community. It spreads like wildfire. And so we talked this morning about how we can be salt by pointing people towards God, by helping and healing those who are sick, by living out our faith and influencing those around us and not lose our saltiness by getting involved with the things of the world. And we talked about the light and not hiding our light, but warning people of what is around and showing the hurt and the pain around us and revealing God as the source of what we do. And so what does this practically look like? Well, I want to give you just a couple practical ways that you could begin doing this today. And these are just some ideas, but these are some that you could start doing today. Last week and this morning, we talked about praying that Ephesians chapter 2 prayer. God, show me the things that we can do. This afternoon at 4 o'clock here in this building, in this room, we're going to have a night of prayer and worship where we collectively as North Christian Church are going to get together and worship together, and we're going to pray through different things collectively as a group. And so I would encourage you, this is a great place to start this, because at one point tonight, we're going to think about this city, and we're going to imagine, if you walk out the front doors of this building, you can see a lot of this city, and so we're going to imagine that in our minds, looking over the city, saying, God, will you be the God of this city? Will you help me impact people around me in this city? And so I'd encourage you If you are not already planning on it, be here tonight at 4 o'clock to join us in prayer and worship before doing that. Last week, we also talked about care groups and kind of reminded everybody care groups are going to be starting up here again in the next couple weeks. One of the things that we're doing for care groups this year is we're trying to make it really, really easy for every single person to lead a care group. And so we're not going to require you to come to a lot of trainings. We're not going to require you to write lessons. We're not going to require you to do a lot of prep. What we're going to do is every month hand you a DVD that has everything on it that you need. All you have to do is get some of your friends together at your house once a week, pop a DVD in, watch some of it, and then answer some questions and just be real about what God's doing in your life. And so if you're not in a care group, I would challenge you to maybe get in one or possibly start one. That is a way that you can be salt and light to people around you, people that may not be able to hear Jesus any other way. Another way is right out here in the foyer is a pack and play. Life Choice is asking for donations in order to help give these products out to expecting mothers. And so Life Choice hands out products and help to expecting mothers all year long, and they're just asking for a few donations. This is one way that we can help influence other people is by simply donating to Life Choice. There's organizations like Camilla House in the community where they're asking simply for volunteers to come and to help serve. We have a team of people working on our benevolence ministry, helping people when they come into seasons where they need help financially or with food. We have different areas you can get involved with that help people, that point people to Jesus, that help you be salt and light in your community. And so the question that we all have to answer, the question that we really have to work through is, am I personally impacting my community? It's not just looking at the church. It's not just asking, is North Christian impacting the community? Because reality is the church is really just made up of a bunch of individuals. Am I personally impacting my community? Am I doing and being what God has called me to be as salt and light to people around me? Or am I pushing against that? Am I resistant? Am I avoiding this because of fear or uncertainty? Or maybe because of sin in my life being mixed up with the world? Who has God placed in your life that you might be the one to share Jesus with them? Who has God put in your life that you might be the one to be salt and light in their life? How have I been impacting my community? Father, again, I just thank you for the opportunity we get to be here. Thank you for your Son who came and who preached this message of acting in such a way that is so different from culture. Father, specifically for us this morning, I pray each one of us, we would be searching our hearts, looking at, am I truly impacting people towards you, or am I involved in other things? Am I too busy to make an impact in people around me? Father, help us to see the areas in which we need to give over to you. Help us see those areas of fear or uncertainty, and help us to give those over to you. Help us pray that prayer from Ephesians chapter 2. God, show me the good things that you would have me do, and give me the strength and the courage to go out and do them. Father, I thank you for the opportunity we get to come here, hopefully refuel, and then go out there into a world and be salt and light